Welcome to the Boosted Volunteer Podcast. We share the stories of dedicated Booster Club volunteers and the tools and strategies they use to run successful booster clubs. We also have sought-out experts on fundraising, volunteer management, and running nonprofits to share best practices. Hosted by Robin Eissler and Evan Eissler, you won't want to miss these great episodes that will help you run your booster club like a champ.
Welcome to the Boosted Volunteer. Today, we're talking with Jim Buchanan. Jim is an adjunct instructor at the McLean College of Business at the University of Mary Hardin-Baylor. He's the founder of the Brighter Honor consulting firm, and he's a former director at AT&T. He has a passion for nonprofit work and has been active with many groups, including the National Business Aviation Association and Teach for America. Jim also has experience leading volunteer boards using Robert's Rules of Order. Jim, welcome to the Boosted Volunteer.
Why, thank you for having me today, Robin. It's great to be here.
Well, I have to preface and let the audience know that you and I have worked together on volunteer boards and committees in the past, and that's why I'm so excited to have you as a guest here, because you run the most efficient board meeting I have ever seen. So...
Well, I will take that as a compliment. We both served on the Certified Aviation Manager Governing Board of the National Business Aviation Association, and we certainly appreciated your service on that board, and I certainly enjoyed my time serving on that board.
Yeah, I always found it interesting how all of the work that I did on nonprofits, whether it was from aviation or to my kids' schools, always came back and tied into my work role. And the two things ran in parallel, and often a tool that I'd start using in the nonprofit would suddenly apply in the business.
That's so true. You know, there's such cross-pollination with so many of the skills that we can learn and use. And you develop a skill or craft for one purpose, and then you find other areas of life to apply it in. So that's a great thing.
Absolutely. I think for our booster club parents, it's the same thing. They jump into what they think is this small role, and all of a sudden they're running a small corporation and nonprofit corporation and trying to figure out how to do it better. So that's why they're here. Well, Jim, I know that you're an expert in Robert's Rules of Order and command a meeting very well. For those that don't know, what's an overview of the Robert's Rules of Order?
Well, Robert's Rules of Order provide a framework to conduct a meeting, to organize it, and then to actually execute and conduct the thing. The original rules were published by General Henry M. Robert in 1876 as a guideline to parliamentary procedure. That means we'll be celebrating 150 years of Robert's Rules coming up here in another year.
It's exciting.
General Robert wrote those rules in response to his own self-judged poor performance leading a meeting. And anyone who has been disappointed by their own performance leading a meeting has subsequently been very thankful for the structure provided by Robert's Rules.
I've read Robert's Rules a couple of times. It's not an easy read, but it does have a lot of great structure in there. I think, in fact, they just came out with a Robert Rules of Order brief book or something like that. So it sort of simplifies it for those of us that are used to getting a quick snippet on ChatGPT or Google these days.
Yeah, well, you can do quick snippets, but it's always good to study the rules. In fact, Rob and I brought my copy of Robert Rules of Order to the recording of this podcast. So I keep up to date, and I find I still have opportunities to use the rules in meetings that I participate in.
I love that. I love that. Well, let's talk about why structure is really important in a nonprofit board meeting. A lot of people come into these roles unprepared. Now they're suddenly commanding a meeting. They may or may not have an agenda, but what goes into the structure and why is it so important?
Well, that's a good question. Structure is important at nonprofits just as it is in for-profit organizations and in legislative bodies. Good rules help the meeting move forward in an organized and dignified manner and restrain individual members from acting on their impulses. Freedom thrives in an environment where there are borders, checks, and balances. Think of your small children playing out in the yard. A fence provides a border to keep them from wandering into the street and its inherent dangers. The rules keep the meeting from descending into a chaotic situation.
I've been in some board meetings where we started at 7 p.m., running a small community school, and all of a sudden it's midnight and we're still sitting there. And in those meetings, I sure would have appreciated somebody keeping a concise agenda and working through it.
And sometimes those long meetings are ones that evolve into long meetings. You come out of the session and you feel like you haven't really accomplished anything. That's probably because you did not have an agenda and you didn't have a chair that kept the meeting focused on the task at hand.
How do you balance formal proceedings with keeping the meetings engaging and productive, especially in a booster club setting? These parents are coming together as volunteers. Some of them may or may not have a nonprofit background. They're really excited about what their kids are doing, but they need to focus on the business of the organization. How do you keep them engaging?
Well, you mentioned agenda a few minutes ago. The chairperson should publish an agenda ahead of the meeting so that the Booster Club members know what to expect at the meeting. A good agenda helps the members prepare for deliberations in the meeting. And following a formal process itself does not in itself keep the meetings from being engaging. It certainly increases the likelihood that the meeting will be productive. Robyn, you and I got to know each other through our common interest or intersection of our careers in business aviation. You have an aviation background. Well, you always want your pilot on your flight to use a formal checklist in the cockpit that enhances the safety of your flight. So following the rules in a meeting actually enhances the environment for engagement at the meeting.
Do you ever stray from the agenda if somebody has something, or how would you incorporate something that's not on the agenda that comes up?
Well, certainly you'll have times where you will want to stray from an agenda. One thing that I like to do is create what I call a parking lot and we'll typically put that on a marker board or on a large sheet of paper that the entire meeting can see. And we'll take that item that someone has come up with and we'll put it in the parking lot. Say, let's hold that for later on in the meeting and get through these other things that take precedence right now on our agenda. And then we'll go back to the parking lot and pick that up and discuss it.
That's a great idea. Do you ever get too many cars in the parking lot, Jim?
Well, you certainly can. You can get a lot of cars and sometimes they'll get in the way of each other. So you've got to organize your way through it. And, an effective chairperson will do that. They'll be able to prioritize things that come up and know which things to pick up and deal with first.
Give us an outline of a proper structure of a meeting. What would be the ideal structure of a board meeting?
Well, first, you need effective pre-work, such as building that agenda and issuing it to your committee members. Then you got to organize the logistics for a comfortable meeting place. Have refreshments. Build out the telecommunications infrastructure if remote participants are joining. And as for the meeting itself, start on time and stay on the agenda. A good agenda will allow time for new items which may pop up for discussion during the meeting, as I referred to in my comment about the parking lot a few minutes ago. Of course, the secretary of the committee, I hope you have elected a secretary for your committee, should prepare accurate minutes of the meeting. I can't tell you how many times good minutes help to clarify what was discussed or decided at prior meetings for boards that I have served on.
It's important, I think, too, to keep a central record for those minutes so everyone knows where to find them and all your members can find them.
That's right. And the minutes don't have to record every single word that was spoken at the meeting, but they need to keep a record of, well, here's the items or the topics we discussed, and here's the decisions that we made.
That's a great framework, just the topics and the decisions. What should be on the agenda and what shouldn't be on the agenda?
Well, oftentimes the bylaws of an organization will specify certain things for an agenda. And certainly in those cases, if the bylaws say that these things should be included on the agenda, make sure you have them on there. Of course, a particular committee meeting may from time to time decide we're going to waive that item from the meeting for a particular meeting. Now, a typical agenda would include things like the time and place of the meeting with remote call logistics, a call to order, verification of a quorum, consideration of previous meeting minutes, committee reports, unfinished business, new business. That's where we go to the parking lot, including that, the time and place of the next meeting, and then finally adjournment when you end and close your meeting. You also ask what should not be on the agenda. Well, anything the committee does not need to discuss should not be on the agenda. For example, if you're holding a meeting to consider this year's budget performance, there's no need to consider or have a conversation about the 5-year plan at that particular meeting. Focus on the matters which brought the meeting together.
I see that often in booster clubs. The tangents are probably more profound in that setting than any other because something's coming up and a parent wants to talk about it. And it's easy to lose the business that you're trying to get done if you continually jump off to these small issues like who are we using for t-shirts this year or something, some random question. It's easy to get way off track.
Yeah, that's right.
What's a common mistake that you see in parliamentary procedure?
I'd say one of the more common mistakes that I've seen is debating a matter without it having first been made into a motion, which is then seconded by a member of the committee. Otherwise, how do you know the committee wants to spend its time on the subject? Or how can the secretary of the committee effectively record amendments to the matter or even state the matter, for example, so that it's clearly recorded in the minutes about here's what we're talking about right now. So it's very important to always use motions that are seconded by someone on the committee.
And so anytime you want to debate something, you should bring that up as a motion, a call for debate, or I motion that we have a debate on this issue.
Would you put that in the form of a motion, Robin?
I motion that.
I move that we discuss this subject, or I move that we talk about how important it is to make motions. I second that. All right, now let's talk about that.
I need to third it. I need to get in here.
Then you can effectively discuss it, and the secretary can effectively write down what the deliberations of the committee were on it and what their outcome or result was of the discussion.
When you're debating issues, or again, in booster clubs, this is people's children, so sometimes things get sensitive. How do you ensure everyone's voice is heard, especially on passionate matters?
You mean booster club members actually get passionate about things?
Oh, boy.
I reckon they do. Leading a board meeting can be, well, for lack of a better word, messy. They can be messy because you're dealing with people. And board members often have a high view of their self-importance, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But sometimes you may see a particular person bully other people on the board. The chair should strike a balance with letting people have their say, while at the same time keeping them focused on the matters at hand. Sometimes you need to coach a board member, take them aside, and help them learn how to better keep their focus. Now, at the end of the day, vigorous debate and deliberation often results in the best policies all around, rather than just having everyone on the committee rubber stamp the chair's preferences. Which makes me wonder, Robin, does the rubber stamp figure of speech even mean anything in today's digital generation?
That's a great question. I was having a discussion a couple of weeks ago with my son, and we were talking about checks bouncing. And all of a sudden I had to explain the reference, and he thought it was a funny story. So he went and told his friends at college the story. And when he used the same phrase, checks bouncing, they're like, well, what do you mean they bounce? Well, what do you mean? Like, do they partially cash? No one had any idea about checks bouncing. So I think you're right. Rubber stamp is another one that they've never seen, that actual stamp that gets pounded on a piece of paper and approved.
You and I have seen that, but that's right. As we move forward in society, people are kind of losing that reference. This is a good time to bring up another important role of the board chair. The chair should actively recruit board members and screen candidates before they're presented for election to the board. Doing a good job of screening and presenting board candidates who will contribute to meetings and who are open to hearing all points of view on a matter during deliberations helps build a strong board that is also prepared for succession when board members retire or otherwise rotate off the board. So that's an important role for the chair of a volunteer board to carefully determine, is this person that we're going to present to the board for joining the board, are they really going to contribute to the board, or are they going to become a stumbling block? And we don't want to have a stumbling block on the board.
I always say that the role of a booster club president is two things. One, it's to be the program's biggest fan, and you better be at every game or performance, and you better be waving the flag all the time. And then the second role is to replace yourself. So you always looking for who can rise up to your role at some point.
That's so true.
How do you, when you're in a meeting and you made these motions, how do you turn the procedure into outcomes?
Well, the outcome is an effective meeting. That is, you have a good conversation, and then you determine if you need to make a decision on it or if you need to lay it on the table to work on it later. Have an agenda, stay on task, determine if there's a quorum at the start of the meeting, and require members who wish to speak, make sure that they get recognized by the chair so that there's order and decency in the meeting. If someone needs a decision to be made, make sure they verbalize their issue and put it in the form of a motion, and that someone else has seconded that so that the committee knows, okay, we have enough interest that we need to discuss this. Let the meeting engage in deliberations with appropriate decorum and respect. The chair should sense when debate should be closed. That's really a soft skill, not a hard skill. But that's one that the chair or the board president will learn over time and through their own experience when debate should be closed. And then they should either call for a vote on the motion or table the motion for further conversation later on if it's not resolved. And if you've not been following Robert's rules in your meetings, this may seem kind of awkward to you at first. But once the board understands them, they will appreciate the rules. Robyn, that's why you asked me to speak about them, because you and I served on a board together where you saw the rules in play and you saw how the rules helped us move our meetings along.
It definitely sets an expectation, and I think I always felt made the meetings much more productive because you knew what you were going into, you knew what you were going to discuss, and at the end of the meeting, you knew what your charge was. You knew what you were responsible for making happen. It was very clear.
Right.
Tell us about a situation that you've had where it was maybe difficult or challenging and using proper meeting procedures helped resolve the issue.
Well, I can point back to one of your earlier questions about why structure is important in a board meeting. I was elected chair of an industry group and was disappointed by my own performance at the first board meeting I chaired. Our agenda called for committee reports to be presented, but it did not specify their style or timing. And it took us more than one day of a 2-day meeting to get through the reports, as some people waxed on about their committee activity. Some even just read aloud their written report instead of calling attention to its highlights. Well, before our next meeting, we amended our rules to specify that each committee chair will submit their report at least 1 week prior to the board meeting. That gave all members the opportunity to read and be familiar with the reports, which led to orderly and prompt discussion of the reports. This cleared the way for other important deliberations further down the agenda.
I think that's an excellent point that board members, if you've agreed to serve on the board, you need to come to the meeting with all your research done. So the meeting is not the time to learn the information. It's the time to move or vote or update the information.
That's right. Good preparation is key.
I see a lot of people who show up and they don't even know what we're going to talk about. And that structure of creating committees and having the committees present on the items that they're working on, that's really important. I know we see that a lot in the professional nonprofit organizations. It's kind of rare to see that in booster clubs. They might have one or two committees for their big fundraisers, but in general, they don't operate with committees. When I ran our local booster club, we did form committees, and it just really helped. Everyone sent in their one little paper with their notes about what was happening at the concession stand or in fundraising or on sponsorships. We could all review it beforehand and then ask a few questions, when we were all together in the meeting. What's the best way to transition or train new board members on procedures and Robert's rules, especially for these groups that may not have any rules in place? So how do you transition?
Well, make sure that new members are provided with a copy of the organization's bylaws and any policy manuals that they have previously adopted. Some of the booster clubs may not have even written up bylaws or prepared a policy manual. That probably is an important exercise that they should go through because, again, those kind of set down some guardrails that help guide the organization and keep them focused on their mission. Now, specifically with Robert's rules, printed editions of the rules can be purchased at many bookstores or online vendors for the price of lunch. Oh, by the way, Robyn, are we going to have lunch together after this? I hope so.
Absolutely.
And there's free versions of the Robert's rules that can be found at websites with a simple internet search. You can also find good tutorials at sites like YouTube on what Robert's rules are and how to use them. Encourage new board members to familiarize themselves with the rules, focusing on the benefits of procedural decorum. And this is a good place to remind the board chair. They need to educate themselves about the rules. You don't have to memorize them, but be familiar with them. I learned to bring a copy of the rules with me to board meetings so I could quickly refer to them if needed. And knowing the rules will give the chair self-confidence in running the meeting. I can't overstate how important it is to have good self-confidence in what you're doing.
Absolutely. I think that's the key to leading any role, right? Is having self-confidence, setting the vision and the rules and how we're going to operate by things. And I can literally remember, Jim, you pulling out the Robert's Rules of Order and referring to them a couple of times in our meetings when there were questions.
Absolutely. I still have my copy and I have amendments also. The rules get revised periodically, amended for current developments in technology or things like that. So it's important to stay up to date on those. And again, that can be done easily with a simple internet search to see what is the current version or revision of Robert's Rules.
Well, I always like to end our Boosted Volunteer episodes with asking about how your life may have been impacted with school sports or activities. So, did you participate in sports or activities? I know you've got some grown children, so did you participate in your kids' activities?
Well, as a student in high school and in college, I participated in theater as an actor and also in technical roles. Learning how to get and stay in character is a valuable trait for the negotiator and team player. That's not to say that you intentionally adopt a position to be something you're not. Rather, you learn to keep your focus when working on a project. And as parents, my wife and I were involved with high school drill team and as Boy and Girl Scout leaders. And yes, we've seen that there can be a lot of drama surrounding those activities, not only with the children, but with the parents as well. Parents that were members of the Booster Club. Well,
Absolutely.
it's a place that we all need to show plenty of our grace to our colleagues and to our kids.
That's a very good point to remember, Jim. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to join us today and sharing your expertise on running a great board meeting. It was always an honor and pleasure to serve on your boards over the years, and I thought your expertise would be very, very useful to our audience here on the Boosted Volunteer.
Well, thanks, Robin. I hope, too, that this will be helpful to Boosted Volunteer clubs, and you certainly made it easy for me to participate in this podcast. So thanks go out to you also, and for all that you do to help parents make their clubs be effective for taking care of their kids or whatever other activities they're involved in making them go forward.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I look forward to our lunch here soon.
Okay, we'll do it.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Bye now.
The Boosted Volunteer is brought to you by Booster Hub. To find out more about Booster Hub and how our app can help you improve communications, increase engagement, raise more money, and manage your Booster Club responsibly, visit www.boosterhub.com. And then make sure to search for Booster Club Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Booster Hub, thanks for listening.